India's voice at the UN. I am a Mount Literan. I want to create a global market for Mirzapur's carpets. I am a Mount Literan. I want to create India's Google. I am a Mount Literan.
Mount Literacy School, inspiring children to be what they want to be through interactive learning, community connect, digital citizenship and the legacy of Z-Learn. Awarded India's #1 school chain of the year.
I am a Mount Literan.
Hello everybody, my name is Divya Joseph and I am an English teacher at Mount Literacy School, Mysore. Today we are going to venture into the world of poetry, as poetry is the manifestation of our imagination. So let's enjoy a lesson on the different forms of poetry. Welcome to the world of poetry. Hello children. Today we are going to the untraveled world of poetry. In this quest, we will identify the common forms of poetry and its writing technique. So let's begin. The first form of poetry that we will be looking at today is an elegy. So what are elegies? Elegies express a lament, often over the death of a loved one. This makes elegies especially popular for funerals. Some elegies are written not only to be read out loud, they can be put to music and sung as well. Here is an example of a very famous elegy by Alfred Tennyson. In Memoriam is an elegy to his close friend Arthur Henry Hallam. Let's have a look at it. Strong Son of God, immortal love, whom we that have not seen thy face, by faith and faith alone embrace, believing where we cannot prove, thine are these orbs of light and shade. Thou madest life in man and brute, thou madest death, and lo, thy foot is on the skull which thou hast made. We now move on to a more funkier form of poetry known as haiku. Haiku is a Japanese form of poetry which is composed of 3 non-rhyming lines. The first and the third lines have 5 syllables each, and the second line has 7 syllables. They often express feelings and thoughts about nature. An example of a haiku about a sea or an ocean. Waves crash on the shore. Sand sparkles in the sunlight. Seagulls swooping past. We will now try to identify the number of syllables in each line. Waves crash on the shore. So we can see 5 syllables in the first line. Sand sparkles in the sunlight. So 7 syllables in the second line. Seagulls swooping past. 5 syllables again in the third line. So here we can see a pattern of 5, 7 and 5 syllables repeated. Now we move on to another form of poetry known as limerick. Limericks are usually silly poems that are fun to read and to write. It is a type of poetry that always has 5 lines. Limericks also have a rhyming pattern. The first, the second and the fifth line all rhyme. The third and the fourth line have a separate rhyme from the other lines. Let us look at an example of a limerick here. There was an old man in a tree, whose whiskers were lovely to see, but the birds of the air plucked them perfectly bare, to make themselves nests in that tree. Now let us look at all the rhyming words here to identify the limerick pattern. In the first line we can see tree, second line see, and in the fifth line tree again. All these three words are rhyming. Now let us look at the third line which has air, and in the fourth line bear. These two sets of words are also rhyming. So here we can see a rhymed sandwich in between. The next form of poetry is an ode. Odes are also called as a poet's favorite. They are also known as pastoral poetry because it elicits such wonderful senses of peace and harmony. Like the haiku, nature is often at the center of these types of poems as well. In general, pastoral poetry will focus on describing a rural place, but the terms will be peaceful and endearing. You will feel at ease after reading these types of poems. Here we have an example of a famous ode by P.B. Shelley known as Ode to the West Wind. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven, like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. The last form of poetry that we will look at today is a diamante. A diamante is a relatively new form of poetry. The idea of poems being shapes or concrete forms is an older concept, but diamante tries to fit into that idea. It is thus intended to produce the shape of a diamond when it is written down. This is what a diamante looks like in basic form. So, in the first line we have a noun followed by two adjectives, then three verbs. After that we have four nouns, three verbs again in the next sentence, then a pair of adjectives, and finally a noun at the end. Become more clear to us when we look at this example of a diamante about the season autumn. Autumn, cool, colorful, changing, blazing, falling. Rain, snow, branches, leaves, budding, flowering, growing, fresh, green, spring. I hope we all have understood all the 5 types of poetry. We will now try to include these in all the poetry writings that we do. Thank you.
So children, today we explored the world of poetry. I wish and hope that you travel on this road much further and explore the different forms of poetry on your own. Thank you.
Literacy School, inspiring children to be what they want to be through interactive learning, community connect, digital citizenship and the legacy of Z Learn. Awarded India's #1 school chain of the year.